Welcome. I'm joined today by Peter in Copenhagen, one of the leading experts from Deloitte in the field of IT and IT financial management. I'm very pleased to have his time to talk about current trends and best practices in that area.
Good morning, Alex. I'm very happy to be here.
Peter, let's start with the topic that currently concerns, I guess, most of us. Predominantly, it's the pandemic that's still ongoing at the end of the year. We've seen a lot of changes in business driven by the situation that COVID has imposed on us. What are the trends and changes you see emerging in the area of IT in that context driven by the pandemic?
From our side, everyone was nervous about the COVID and how their businesses would be impacted by it. And there's not a simple answer. However, what we can see that after the first period, companies are now over-investing in digital and technology. And in Deloitte, we see a lot of demand within e-commerce. So all companies that have a significant part within their e-channels, they are investing heavily there. We can see the core revival. So basically their ERP systems, a lot of replacement programs are in motion at the moment. We can also see cloud adoption. That was already in motion, but has been multiplied in force now by this crisis. Cyber security is also a hot topic and drives a lot of work for us. And finally, I would say that agile ways of working is now becoming the norm within companies as well. So as COVID continues to impact societies, we can just see that these trends will continue over the coming periods or years.
It's very interesting to hear. I assume all these changes you're talking about and the different initiatives also require significant investment, obviously, to drive the change. So how do you see also then the impact from a financial perspective? So the question, how does this affect the interplay of finance and IT in these companies?
Well, I would highlight basically 4 areas within managing IT financials. So the first one would be standard IT financial framework. As IT spend is growing and is a significant part of the cost base in many companies, you revert to having a standard framework to organize and categorize your cost base. So that's one part. Cloud capability is another part, also known as FinOps. So managing cloud costs is a new discipline where you need to understand the shift from CapEx to OpEx, and as well as the consumption of resources, so the types and sizes and demand versus reserved instances. The third part would be supporting agile ways of working. And there you need to go from to a capacity-based budgeting model or funding model, and implementing also lean portfolio management to prioritize which initiative to complete. The final part is handling complex chargeback models. That's because you have a growing significant cost base, and many companies introduced very, very complex chargeback models to be very detailed. Now, that needs to be simplified in many, many cases. So that's my view on the 4 different areas that are going into play in IT finance management at the moment. So Alex, of course, many companies, they strive for increased digital investments. However, given the impact of the crisis, they struggle to increase the budgets for them. So they need to consider the current spend and discuss how to create efficiencies to free up some budget in order to fund that innovation. What is your experience and best practice to do that?
Well, the key is to create transparency, Peter. You need to have a good database and view on your cost and structure it the way you talked about that in cost models, that you can draw the right conclusions where to free up budget. I've seen 3 major levers that you can pull on that. First of all is looking at the demand side. So looking at the chargeback perspective you were just talking about. It is important that you have an understanding why the money is spent. Often IT is a big cost block, and the question is, what is it used for? Structuring it along business services and understanding how and why these business services are used, you can then ask the question, are they needed? Are they needed in that capacity and quality? Or do I have a chance to optimize either the volume or the specifications, perhaps reducing or changing service levels? And therefore you free up budget when you establish a clear market mechanism. So when there's a demand for a certain volume, there's also justification, or if there's not, there's potential to free up budget. The other perspective is looking at it from a supply side. It is important that you have a real total cost of ownership view for your services, that you can break down what drives the cost of a service, and then you can identify on a more granular level where there might be savings potentials, e.g. by sourcing differently, by optimizing, by creating synergies, by consolidating infrastructures. So there are several levers to be applied, but the first step is you need to know where is the major cost driver in order to find a measure to adjust it. And last but not least, a big lever is also a portfolio optimizations. I see a lot of clients running a huge amount of projects, and there is not a good transparency which projects have which business case. And sometimes I think it's better to focus on the real valuable projects, focus your energy and budget there, and also take the tough decision to cut off a long tail of investments who consume resource and money that might not bring the company forward. But that's a complex problem. And again, you need a good database and transparency on the financials around a project to take such a decision. So we've been talking about digital investments, Peter. So digital and investment that actually brings up the topic of finance and IT. So the CIO is obviously involved, but also the CFO. How do you see the role of these two functions in the whole process that we just discussed?
Well, I think that digital or IT is not alone in experience high cost pressures. That goes across the whole enterprise. Now, the key issue in digital is that there's a requirement to reduce and rationalize current and legacy services while investing heavily in new innovative solutions. So how do you do that? That's the main question I see. And the CIO basically needs to be able to have cross-functional teams, flexible timelines, and going to a product focus and not a project focus. While the CFO, for example, needs fiscal control, that is opposing a little bit what the CIO needs, measurable return on investments, and what is the value creation of these investments. So the CIO and the CFO need to work together in order to solve that equation. So Alex, for the CIO and the CFO, what are the current challenges that they face? And how is the lack of transparency and inadequate data putting them in a disadvantage when it comes to effective cost management?
I think the challenges they face is that the pace of decisions to be made increases. Yeah, so in order to be agile and fast moving in such changing environment we currently see, you need to make quick decisions. So currently, I assume on the table of CIOs and CFOs, a lot of investment requests from business to invest in digitization. And the question is, what is the right investment? And if you don't have the right transparency and the right data, it's very tough, obviously, to take the right decision. In best case, this only means a slowdown. So it takes longer. You need another iteration. You need to go back to your teams in finance and IT to provide further information for the decision making. In the worst case, you take wrong decisions, because often what is underestimated in a digital investments company only see the tip of the iceberg, which is the initial investment. But every solution you bring into the company, every digital solution also has a long-term requirement for resources in maintenance, in adjustment, in operations, and so on. So it's really important to also there look from a TCO perspective at the investment, at the cost and the benefits. And therefore CIOs and CFOs really rely on a good and correct, transparent database to take the right decision. So Peter, we talked a lot about cost now, and obviously cost is a very relevant decision criteria when it comes to digital investment. But another criteria which becomes even more important or grows in importance as well is the question of sustainability. How sustainable is my investment? Given the current discussion on global climate change, this is a very important topic for companies to factor in. How do you see the C-suite can strike for the right balance when it comes to digital investment between optimizing cost and also ensuring sustainability?
Well, Alex, I think that sustainability is a hot topic and all organizations need to react to it. But to be honest, it's quite a new area. So many organizations are just now trying to figure it out. What we see in the market is that many technology and cloud providers are developing sustainability metrics based on their automated data collection. And a classic area for them is to look into their power consumption. They're going through their supply chain and also see where they source that energy to especially their data centers. Sustainability metrics together with cost transparency can now give you a balanced decision foundation in order to see where you get the most impact on sustainability as opposed to the lowest cost. Whether sustainability will have a cost impact is yet to be shown, but we'll see in the near future, I'm sure of it.
You mentioned cloud providers in that context, Peter. Can you explain why cloud is an option to achieve a better sustainability?
Going towards net zero emissions is part of almost all organization strategies. What we can see of our cloud providers is that they can provide modern facilities, more computing power per unit of hardware, so to say, and they can also source power in a more efficient way. So overall, we can see that the cloud providers provide a good alternative to obtaining net zero emissions for companies.
So nevertheless, we need to look at the fact that many companies still have historically given own data centers. Now, if they want to move to the cloud to leverage the advantages you talked about before, Peter, what are the factors to consider to make that move successful?
Many of our clients, they experience that moving to the cloud is at best a one-to-one on the cost levels. What is typically missing is two parts. An old acquaintance called governance, so financial governance of their cloud resources. And the other one is active optimization. And what does that mean? It means that you need to constantly resize, snooze, consider reserving instances versus on-demand resources. So Alex, what is in your view needed in order to maintain or lower those cost levels when migrating to the cloud?
Well, first of all, you need to understand what's the total cost of ownership of a service you're migrating today in your existing infrastructure. Only if you have a good knowledge about this is really the unit cost of a service that I currently have, you are able to compare and calculate with the offerings from cloud providers, what is the future operating cost? Yeah? Is it similar? Is it hopefully lower? Or is it maybe even higher? And to understand that, to make this decision, you also need to understand your own consumption volumes and patterns. Because the tariffs the cloud providers typically offer are very transparent and very granular to be influenced, but this granularity also leads to complexity. So they're quite difficult to understand. And the pricing is quite different from your usage behavior. For example, if you want to back up a large amount of data just once a month, it's a totally different usage pattern than if you have very frequent read and write interactions of digital e-commerce platform, for example. So for these two different types, the backup and the e-commerce platform, you need to choose different tariffs for your infrastructure to get an optimal pricing. And to understand this is not very easy for the clients, so it needs the right transparency and the comparison to make the right decision for the move to the cloud and then also to choose the right tariff model. So apart from the move to the cloud, are there any other option businesses can choose from your experience to strike for a good sustainability while still having cost optimization in mind?
Well, I think that in many companies, COVID was a temporary thing. but they learned a lot about working from home, remote, and digitally. So if you look at a technology organization, it's the hardware part on the power consumption, and the other part is a lot around their people. So reducing travel and commuting was shown to be an effective way also to improve their sustainability.
At Serviceware, being a provider of financial management solution, obviously a lot of clients have adopted advanced technologies from our portfolio to face the challenge of managing the cost for global shared services, creating the transparency needed that we talked about in order to improve the decision making. What are your experiences of companies, how they adapted to the challenges? What was their route to success? And maybe you can talk about also the journey they took on that way.
Well, companies, when they go into an IT financial management journey, basically want to have three main capabilities. To manage source data and transform them. They want to be able to cost model, have a calculation engine. And finally, reporting, visualization, and user experience. Many clients, they start with getting a picture of their architecture. So which integrations do they need into this new system? What functionality and what is the use cases that they bring to their end users? I've seen a lot of different solutions being built. So for managing source data, you can use, for example, SAP tools or Azure, Microsoft Azure. For the modeling part, I have seen anything from Alteryx to SAP Analytics Cloud to different types of financial modeling tools. And finally, on the reporting side, we can also see that there's enterprise-wide reporting tools such as Power BI or Tableau being used, which is then common for the user to use again and again for different reporting perspectives. Another approach is, for example, your company here, Serviceware, where you can have a purpose-built solution that provides all of these steps. So Serviceware can ingest data, it can transform it, it can model, and also do the reporting. But I've also seen mixes of approaches to this. So you have a tool that can do the ingestion and modeling, while reporting is in a completely third tool. So there's a variety of this, and the first thing companies need to do is look at their architecture and how it's supported across the enterprise. So looking ahead, how do companies manage an uncertain future?
I think a key capability is being able to adapt a flexible planning and forecasting approach. Who would have planned in 2019 for a global pandemic as part of their plan for 2020? I guess little to no companies have done that. But now looking in future, they might think about different scenarios. Will there be a speedy recovery? Will the pandemic affect their business more longer? Nobody knows really. So it's good to open a few scenarios. And if you have the right processes and technology in place to easily create such scenarios, this gives you much more flexibility in your strategic options. Many companies struggle to even build one plan. You are well advised to improve here to be able to plan for multiple scenarios and also switch scenarios as you go. So therefore, having good analytic capabilities to work in such a scenario-minded approach, I think is important in order to cope with an uncertain future. So obviously in these uncertain times, businesses are all thinking about how can we better prepare for what's coming. What are your predictions for the future, Peter, in the topic of IT finance and IT management?
Well, Alex, I think there's the before mentioned trends will continue, but I think there will be a number of new trends coming over the years. And one of them is automation. So you will see a lot of automation, and also within IT finance. What we see today is that many IT finance teams, organizations, is doing a lot of manual work. They're moving data from one point to another. Processes are being done in a manual way. We need to do that more automated. That's one thing. The next thing is that data sharing across platforms. And I think that finance figures will also follow that trend. So it needs to be available for decision makers in the right platform in their tools. So we will see that as a trend. And the final thing is business becomes digital, meaning that a lot of areas today which are driven by manual work will be replaced by digital solutions. And those digital solutions we need to be able to break down in order to cost them also. So there will be a need to figure that out as a third trend.
So that's a great way to phrase it. Business is digital. Do you have a concrete example, Peter, what this means?
Yeah, well, one of our clients, a bank in the Danish market, they have just reorganized and they no longer have a digital organization. It's the business. They have distributed the complete digital organization into their business areas. So Alex, we've talked a lot about the external parts of impacting companies. In order to get started on the journey of building transparency and building those scenario forecasting you've talked about, how do you practically see that?
Well, it is important for them to build up this clear database and the processes and governance around it to create the transparency we talked about. That's the core step, to really establish a clear steering model for their technology cost in order to understand it, to find optimization potential, and then also to derive the right decisions for future investments. And this is, I would also recommend companies to talk to Deloitte, because they are the leading experts in the field who advise large organizations on how to best build up such a steering model. Once this model is clear, then obviously the next step is to bring this into the right technology. Here is where we from Serviceware can help with our IT financial management solution to establish the right tool set to achieve the goals we talked about. And this is why I'm also very happy that we partnered up with Deloitte to be able to offer the client the full package from the strategy, the steering logic, up to the implementation in the right software tools to be ready to make successful and right digital investment decisions.